I'll never forget the moment I saw that chain. A thick, industrial-grade chain, wrapped around the gates to my own property, secured with a padlock the size of my fist. The metal gleamed in the morning sun like a slap across my face. My hands were shaking as I read the official notice, zip-tied to the chain. Property access suspended by order of Willowbrook Estates HOA. Board. Violations pending resolution. Trespassing will result in prosecution. Trespassing. On my own land. The land my grandfather had owned for 60 years. Before these people even knew this valley existed. But here's what they didn't know. What they couldn't have possibly known when they made the biggest mistake of their entitled lives. That bridge they all used to get to their precious McMansions. The one spanning Devil's Creek that provided the only access to Willowbrook Estates. I owned it. Every plank, every support beam, every square inch of that bridge belonged to me. And I was about to remind them exactly what that meant. They thought they could lock me out. Instead, I was about to lock them all in. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I never wanted to be at war with my neighbors. All I ever wanted was the simple life my grandfather had promised me when he left me his cabin in the mountains of North Carolina. Grandpa Joe had been a logger back when the forests were thick and the work was honest. He bought 47 acres along Devil's Creek in 1962 for what would barely cover a tank of gas today. The land came with water rights, mineral rights, and something that seemed insignificant at the time, ownership of the old timber bridge that crossed the creek. That bridge was built by my own hands. He'd tell me every summer when I visited as a kid. 40 feet of hand-hewn oak and steel cable. Built it to last. Forever. Just like everything else worth doing. The cabin itself was modest. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch that overlooked the creek. But to me, it was paradise. When Grandpa Joe passed in 2019, I inherited not just the property, but his dream of a quiet life away from the chaos of the city. I was a burned-out software engineer from Charlotte, completely fried from 12-hour days and office politics. The cabin represented everything I was missing: peace, authenticity, connection to something real. I took my savings, my remote work arrangement, and moved to the mountains full-time. For the first year, I was completely alone out there. Just me, the creek, and the sound of wind through the pines. I spent my days working from the porch, my evenings fishing, and my weekends restoring the cabin exactly the way Grandpa Joe would have wanted. Then the developers came. Willowbrook Estates appeared seemingly overnight. One day I was looking across the creek at virgin forest, and the next, bulldozers were carving roads through the hills. The sales signs promised luxury mountain living and exclusive community. Houses started going up, massive, modern things that looked like they'd been airlifted from suburban Atlanta. And every single one of those houses could only be reached by crossing Grandpa Joe's bridge. At first, the new residents were polite enough. They'd wave when they drove past my cabin on their way to and from their million-dollar homes. Some even stopped to chat, complimenting my garden or asking about the history of the area. "Oh, you're the grandson Joe always talked about," said Mrs. Henderson the first to move in. "He was so proud of you. Such a sweet man." I felt a warmth in my chest. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. Maybe we could all coexist peacefully. But as more houses filled in, the dynamic began to shift. Where there had been friendly waves, I started getting stares. Where there had been casual conversations, I began to notice hushed discussions that stopped when I approached. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March 2021. I was having my coffee on the porch when a convoy of black SUVs pulled up to my gate. Out stepped 5 people in business attire, led by a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning," she called out in a voice so artificially sweet it made my teeth ache. "I'm Brenda Carlisle, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. We need to talk." I should have known right then that Brenda Carlisle was trouble. Everything about her screamed corporate manipulation, from her power suit that probably cost more than my monthly expenses, to the way she looked at my cabin like it was a stain on her perfectly curated world. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, not waiting for an invitation to enter my property, "we have some concerns about your situation here." My situation? I set my coffee cup down slowly. "You mean living on my own land?" "Well, yes, that's part of the issue." She gestured broadly at my cabin, my garden, my life. "You see, Willowbrook Estates is a planned community with certain standards that ensure property values remain high and the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood is maintained." I felt my jaw clench. This isn't your neighborhood. This is my family's land, and I was here first. "Technically, yes," Brenda said with that plastic smile. "But practically speaking, you're now surrounded by a community of homeowners who've invested substantial sums in their properties whose values are directly impacted by the appearance of surrounding areas." One of the men behind her, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck, stepped forward. "I'm Derek Vaughn, HOA legal counsel. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer for your property, well above market value." I laughed. Actually laughed. "You want to buy my grandfather's land so you can tear down his cabin and build another McMansion?" "We prefer the term luxury mountain residence," Brenda corrected. "And yes, that's exactly what we're proposing. A clean transaction that benefits everyone." No, the word came out harder than I intended. "This land isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever." Brenda's smile faltered for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. "Mr. Sullivan, I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation. You're surrounded by property owners who are committed to maintaining certain standards that your rustic lifestyle may not align with." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you," she said, the sweetness completely gone from her voice now. "The Willowbrook Estates HOA has certain powers within our community. Boundaries. Powers that we will use to protect our residents' investments." "Your community boundaries?" I stood up from my chair. "Lady, you're standing on my property right now, uninvited. I think it's time for you to leave." Derek stepped forward again. "Actually, Mr. Sullivan, if you check your county records, you'll find that your property is now technically within the Willowbrook Estates Community Development Area, which means you're subject to HOA oversight," Brenda finished, "whether you want to be or not." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. This land has been in my family for 60 years. Times change," Brenda said, her smile returning. "Communities evolve. You can evolve with us, or..." She let the threat hang in the air. That night, I drove to the county courthouse and spent 4 hours going through property records. What I found made my stomach turn. Through a series of bureaucratic maneuvers and strategic property acquisitions, the developers had managed to incorporate my grandfather's land into their HOA jurisdiction. It was all legal, all properly filed, and completely devastating. I was now, technically, a member of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, an organization I'd never joined, never agreed to be part of, and whose rules I'd never seen. The first violation notice arrived 3 days later. Notice of violation: unapproved exterior paint color. The structure at 1247 Devils Creek Road displays exterior paint colors not approved by the Willowbrook Estates Architectural Review Committee. Natural wood stain is not an approved exterior finish. Property owner has 30 days to repaint structure in approved colors. See attached color palette, or face daily fines of $100. I stared at the notice in disbelief. They wanted me to paint my grandfather's log cabin, a cabin that had been naturally weathered for 60 years, whose logs had aged to a beautiful silver gray that told the story of decades in the mountains. I called the HOA office immediately. "Willowbrook Estates, this is Ashley," came a perky voice. "This is Marcus Sullivan. I received a violation notice about my cabin's paint color. This is a historic log structure that's never been painted. It doesn't need to be painted." Oh, Mr. Sullivan. Yes, Brenda mentioned you might call. I'm afraid all exterior surfaces within Willowbrook Estates must be painted in approved colors. It's right there in the covenant. What covenant? I never signed any covenant. Well, your property is within our jurisdiction now, so the covenant applies. Regardless, would you like me to send you a copy? Yes, and I want to appeal this violation. Of course. You can file an appeal with the Architectural Review Committee. There's a $500 filing fee, and the next meeting is in 6 weeks. $500? To appeal a violation I shouldn't have gotten in the first place. I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan, but those are the rules. I hung up and immediately called a lawyer. Robert Chun was a property rights attorney in Asheville who specialized in HOA disputes. He listened to my story with growing concern. Marcus, I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. Really bad. What they've done is legally questionable, but the paperwork appears to be in order. Fighting this could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. But it's my land. My grandfather's land. I understand that. But HOAs have enormous power once they establish jurisdiction. They can fine you, place liens on your property, even foreclose if the fines get high enough. Foreclose? On land that's been in my family for 60 years. It happens more often than you'd think. My advice? See if you can work something out with them. Maybe some kind of compromise. But I knew there would be no compromise with Brenda Carlisle. This was about power, control, and forcing me off my own land. The second violation notice arrived a week later. Notice of violation unapproved landscaping. The property at 1247 Devils Creek Road contains multiple unapproved plant species and lacks approved landscaping plan. Vegetable gardens are prohibited in front yard areas. Property owner has 30 days to remove all unapproved vegetation and submit landscaping plan for approval or face daily fines of $75. They wanted me to tear up my grandfather's garden, the tomatoes and peppers, and beans that had fed our family for 3 generations, the wildflowers that my grandmother had planted as a young bride, the medicinal herbs that Grandpa Joe had used to treat everything from headaches to arthritis. I stood in that garden, surrounded by the fruits of my family's labor, and felt something break inside me. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about erasing my family's history, destroying everything my grandfather had built, turning his simple mountain paradise into another cookie-cutter suburban Hell's Cape. The third violation notice was the cruelest of all. Notice of violation nuisance animal noise. The roosters kept at 1247 Devils Creek Road create excessive noise that disturbs the peace and quiet of Willowbrook Estates residents. All livestock must be removed from the property within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. They wanted me to get rid of Hemingway and Steinbeck, my grandfather's roosters. He'd named them after his favorite writers, claiming they were better company than most people. These birds had been with our family for 8 years. They were practically pets. But more than that, they were the last living connection to my grandfather's way of life. That night, I sat on my porch with a whiskey, listening to the sound of Devils Creek and trying to figure out how my peaceful mountain retreat had turned into a war zone. The violation notices were piling up, the fines were accumulating, and Brenda Carlisle was slowly but systematically destroying everything I loved about this place. I was looking at the bridge, watching the last of the evening traffic from Willowbrook Estates cross over to the main road, when something occurred to me. Something that made me sit up straight and set down my whiskey glass. I pulled out my phone and called Robert Chin. Robert, it's Marcus Sullivan. I need you to pull the deed to my property. All of it. Every page, every attachment, every addendum. Marcus, it's 9 o'clock at night. This is important. I need to know exactly what property rights I inherited from my grandfather. Specifically, I need to know about the bridge. The bridge, the old timber bridge that crosses Devil's Creek. The one that every single Willowbrook Estates resident uses to get to and from their homes. There was a long pause. I'll pull the records first thing in the morning. Make it tonight, Robert. I think I may have found our ace in the hole. The call came at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. I was barely awake, but Robert, Chen's voice was electric with excitement. Marcus, you need to sit down for this. I'm already sitting. What did you find? You don't just own the land the bridge sits on. You own the bridge itself. Timber, steel, everything. It's explicitly detailed in the original 1962 deed. Your grandfather retained ownership of the bridge structure and all rights associated with its use. I felt my heart start pounding. What does that mean exactly? It means you have the legal right to control access to that bridge. You can allow people to use it. You can charge tolls. You can even restrict access entirely. And, Marcus, that bridge is the only way in or out of Willowbrook Estates. The developers never built an alternate route because they assumed they had perpetual access rights to your grandfather's bridge. But they never asked permission. They never needed to. Your grandfather was a generous man who never restricted access. But legally speaking, every resident of Willowbrook Estates has been trespassing on your bridge for 2 years. I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee cup. Are you telling me I can block their access? I'm telling you that bridge is your private property, and you have every right to control who uses it. But Marcus, before you do anything rash, we need to consider the implications. Blocking access to an entire neighborhood could result in serious legal challenges. What kind of challenges? They could claim you're holding them hostage, interfering with their property rights, creating a public nuisance. They might even try to have the government seize the bridge through eminent domain. But in the meantime, you hold all the cards. I hung up and walked out to the bridge, seeing it with completely new eyes. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, 40 feet of hand-hewn oak plank supported by steel cables and concrete footings. Grandpa Joe had built it to last, and after 60 years, it was still solid as the day he'd finished it. More importantly, it was mine. I spent the morning walking every inch of my property, reading through every document Robert had sent me, and formulating a plan. The HOA had tried to use bureaucracy and legal manipulation to force me off my land. Now it was time to show them what real leverage looked like. My first stop was the county courthouse, where I filed for a formal property survey to establish the exact boundaries of my ownership. While I was there, I also filed paperwork to officially register my exclusive ownership of the bridge structure. Next, I visited a sign company in town. I need a sign, I told the owner. Professional grade, weather resistant, something that'll last. What do you want it to say? I smiled. Private bridge. Property of Marcus Sullivan. Authorized users only. Trespassing will be prosecuted. How big you want this sign? Big enough that nobody can miss it. The sign was installed the next morning, right at the entrance to the bridge on my side of the creek. I also had a smaller sign posted on the Willowbrook Estates side, just to make sure the message was clear. The phone started ringing within an hour. Mr. Sullivan, this is Brenda Carlisle. We need to discuss this bridge situation immediately. Good morning, Brenda. I assume you saw my new signage. Your signage is completely inappropriate and potentially illegal. That bridge provides access to a residential community. You can't simply restrict its use. Actually, I can. It's my bridge, built on my property, and I have the legal right to control access. I'm surprised your legal team didn't catch this when you were doing your property research. Mr. Sullivan, you're being unreasonable. Our residents have been using that bridge for 2 years. There's an established right-of-way. Established by whom? I never granted anyone permission to use my bridge. I was simply allowing it out of courtesy. Courtesy that you've made clear isn't appreciated. What do you want? The artificial sweetness was completely gone from her voice. Now, I want my violation notices rescinded. All of them. I want a written guarantee that the HOA will never again attempt to regulate my property. And I want a formal apology for the harassment I've endured. That's absolutely not going to happen. Then I guess your residents better start looking for alternate routes to town, because as of tomorrow, this bridge is closed to unauthorized traffic. You can't do that. Watch me. I hung up and immediately called Robertson to make sure I was on solid legal ground. You're definitely within your rights, he confirmed. But be prepared for them too. Fight dirty. They're going to try every legal and political maneuver they can think of. Let them try. I'm tired of being pushed around. That afternoon, I drove to a hardware store and bought a heavy-duty chain and padlock. I also purchased a steel bar gate that could be installed across the bridge entrance, but I didn't install it yet. First, I want to give Brenda and her HOA board one more chance to be reasonable. That evening, I typed up a letter and hand-delivered it to every house in Willowbrook Estates. Dear neighbors, you may have noticed the new signage on Devil's Creek Bridge. I want to explain the situation so there are no misunderstandings. The bridge you use to access your homes is privately owned by me, inherited from my grandfather who built it in 1962. For 2 years, I've allowed unrestricted access out of neighborly courtesy. Unfortunately, your HOA has chosen to harass me with frivolous violation notices, demanding that I alter my family's historic property to meet standards I never agreed to follow. I've been threatened with daily fines and potential foreclosure over matters as trivial as paint colors and vegetable gardens. I'm prepared to resolve this situation amicably. All I ask is for the same respect and courtesy I've shown you. If your HOA continues its campaign of harassment, I will be forced to restrict access to my bridge until the matter is resolved. I hope it doesn't come to that. Sincerely, Marcus Sullivan, owner, Devil's Creek Bridge. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang continuously for the next 3 hours. Marcus, this is Jim Henderson. We had no idea the HOA was hassling you like this. Most of us don't even go to the board meetings. Marcus, this is Sarah Chun from Pine Ridge Drive. I'm appalled by what Brenda's been doing. A lot of us moved here for the mountain character, not to live in some sterile subdivision. Mr. Sullivan, this is Dave Kowalski. I'm a contractor, and I can tell you that your grandfather's cabin is one of the most authentic structures in this whole valley. What they're asking you to do is criminal. By the end of the evening, I'd received calls from 23 of the 37 households in Willowbrook Estates. All of them were supportive. All of them were appalled by the HOA's behavior, and all of them wanted to know how they could help. But the most important call came at 9:30 p.m. Mr. Sullivan, this is Tom Brennan. I live on Maple Court, and I wanted you to know that several of us are planning to attend tomorrow night's emergency HOA board meeting. Brenda called it to discuss your bridge situation, but I think she's going to be surprised by how many residents show up. I appreciate the support, Tom. There's something else you should know. I used to be an attorney before I retired. Real estate law. If you'd like, I could review your property documents and maybe attend the meeting with you. I'd be grateful for any help you can offer. Good, because Brenda Carlisle has been a problem for this community long before you came along. I think it's time someone stood up to her. As I hung up the phone, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was about a community standing up to a bully who'd been hiding behind the HOA's authority to push people around. And tomorrow night, we were going to end her reign of terror once and for all. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen anything like it. By 7 p.m., every seat was filled, with residents standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Tom Brennan had been right. Brenda Carlisle was definitely surprised. I walked in at exactly 7:15, flanked by Tom and Robertson. The room fell silent as I made my way to the front, where Brenda sat behind a long table with the other board members. Her face was a mask of barely controlled fury. Mr. Sullivan, she said through gritted teeth, thank you for joining us. I trust you've reconsidered your unreasonable demands. Actually, I've added to them. I replied, taking a seat in the front row. But first, I think your neighbors would like to hear exactly what those demands are. I stood and turned to face the packed room. These were good people, retirees, who'd come to the mountains for peace, young families seeking a better life, professionals who wanted to escape the city rat race. They deserved to know what their HOA board had been doing in their name. 2 weeks ago, your HOA president and her legal counsel came to my property, uninvited, and demanded that I sell my family's land so they could tear down my grandfather's cabin and build another mansion. When I refused, they began a campaign of harassment designed to force me off my property. A murmur ran through the crowd. Brenda banged her gavel. "Mr. Sullivan, you're out of order. This meeting is to discuss your illegal restriction of bridge access, not to air your personal grievances." My personal grievances? I pulled out the stack of violation notices. "Let me read these to your neighbors, Brenda. Maybe they'd like to know how their HOA board operates." I read each violation notice in detail. The demand to paint a historic log cabin, the order to destroy my grandfather's garden, the requirement to get rid of family roosters. With each notice, the murmurs in the room grew louder and angrier. "That's enough," Brenda shouted, standing up. "Mr. Sullivan, you are deliberately undermining the authority of this board and the integrity of our community standards." "Community standards?" Sarah Chun stood up from the back. "Brenda, that man's cabin has more character than every house in this development combined. What you're doing is vandalism." "The covenants clearly state," Brenda began. "The covenants we never voted on," interrupted Dave Kowalski. "The covenants you and your board wrote in secret and imposed on all of us." Tom Brennan stood up. "I've reviewed the HOA's incorporation documents, and I have serious questions about the legality of how Mr. Sullivan's property was included in this jurisdiction. Questions that a court might find very interesting." Brenda's face was turning red. "Mr. Brennan, you have no authority to." "Actually, I do." Tom smiled. "As of this afternoon, I've been elected as an alternate board member with the support of 31 households. That's more than enough to call for a vote of no confidence in the current board." The room erupted. Residents were standing, shouting, demanding answers. Brenda was banging her gavel frantically, but she'd lost control completely. Derek Vaughn, the HOA lawyer, leaned over and whispered something urgently in Brenda's ear. She listened, then sat down heavily. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek said, standing up, "perhaps we can resolve this matter without further complications. Mr. Sullivan, what exactly would it take for you to restore bridge access?" I had them. After weeks of harassment and intimidation, they were finally ready to negotiate. But I wasn't going to make it easy. First, all violation notices against my property are rescinded immediately and permanently. Second, my property is removed from HOA jurisdiction entirely. Third, the board issues a formal apology for the harassment I've endured. And fourth, I paused for effect. Brenda Carlisle resigns as HOA president. "That's absolutely unacceptable," Brenda shrieked. "I will not be forced out by some hillbilly with delusions of grandeur." The room fell dead silent. Even her own board members were staring at her in shock. Jim Henderson stood up slowly. "Brenda, I think you need to step outside and cool down. I will not be told what to do by Brenda." Tom Brennan's voice cut through her rant like a blade. "Sit down and shut up. You've embarrassed this community enough for one night." For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Her face was purple, her hands were shaking, and she looked like she was having trouble breathing. Then Derek whispered something else in her ear, and the fight went out of her completely. "Fine," she said quietly. "We'll rescind the violation notices. All of them." I pressed, "All of them, and remove my property from HOA jurisdiction?" Derek nodded reluctantly. "We can file the paperwork." "And the apology?" Brenda looked like she was swallowing poison. "The board regrets any inconvenience you may have experienced." That's not an apology, Brenda. That's a non-apology. Try again. She closed her eyes. I apologize for the violation notices. They were excessive. And I resign as HOA president, effective immediately. The room exploded in cheers. People were hugging, high-fiving, and shouting, "Congratulations." For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. But I wasn't quite done yet. "There's one more thing," I said, raising my voice over the celebration. "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The room quieted down. "I'm proposing that we dissolve the current HOA entirely and form a new one. A real community organization that actually serves the residents instead of bullying them. Tom Brennan has agreed to help draft new covenants that protect property rights while maintaining reasonable community standards." "What about the bridge?" asked Sarah Chun. "Will you keep it open?" I smiled. "The bridge will remain open to all residents, just as my grandfather intended. But I'm also going to post a permanent sign explaining its history, so everyone knows the story of the man who built it with his own hands and the community that stands up for each other." The applause was deafening. As the meeting broke up and people began filing out, Tom Brennan approached me. "That was beautifully done, Marcus. But you know this isn't over, right? Brenda's not going to go quietly." "Let her try," I said. "I've got 37 households on my side now, plus a bridge she can't get around. What's she going to do?" As if in answer to my question, Brenda Carlisle walked past us toward the exit. She paused and turned back, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "This isn't over, Sullivan," she hissed. "I have connections in this county. I have lawyers. I have resources you can't imagine. I will make you regret the day you ever crossed me." "Brenda," I said calmly, "you've already done your worst. You tried to steal my land, destroy my home, and erase my family's history. You failed. Now it's time for you to move on. We'll see about that." She stormed out, but her threat felt hollow. She'd lost her power base, her authority, and her credibility. What could she possibly do now? I was about to find out. 3 months later, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunrise over Devil's Creek when Tom Brennan's truck pulled up to my gate. He was grinning from ear to ear and carrying a manila envelope. "You're going to love this," he said, climbing the porch steps. "Good news. The best." He pulled a document from the envelope. "Brenda Carlisle's lawsuit against you has been dismissed with prejudice." Not only did the judge throw it out, but he sanctioned her attorney for filing a frivolous claim. I took the document and read it quickly. Brenda had tried to sue me for unlawful restriction of access and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The judge had called her claims wholly without merit and ordered her to pay my legal fees. "There's more," Tom said. "Derek Vaughn has filed a motion to withdraw as HOA counsel. Turns out he's been billing excessive hours for questionable legal work. The state bar is opening an investigation." And Brenda moved to Florida last week, sold her house at a loss, and left town without saying goodbye to anyone. I set the document down and looked out at the bridge. A few early commuters were crossing on their way to work, and I could see kids from the neighborhood riding their bikes across on their way to school. It was exactly what Grandpa Joe had envisioned when he built it all those years ago. "You know what the best part is?" Tom continued. "The new HOA board voted unanimously to designate your cabin as a historic landmark. We're also creating a community fund to help maintain the bridge." "That's not necessary." "It is to us. Marcus, you did something incredible here. You stood up to a bully when nobody else would. You brought this community together, and you showed us that sometimes the little guy really can win." Over the past 3 months, Willowbrook Estates had transformed from a sterile suburban development into a real community. The new HOA had simplified the covenants to focus on actual community needs rather than petty aesthetic control. Several residents had started vegetable gardens inspired by mine. The Hendersons had even gotten chickens. Most importantly, People talk to each other now. They stop to chat when they cross the bridge. They organized potluck dinners and community work days. They'd learned that their strength came from supporting each other, not from tearing each other down. There's something else, Tom said, pulling another document from his envelope. The county is interested in purchasing an easement for the bridge to ensure permanent public access. They're offering a substantial sum. I shook my head. The bridge stays exactly as it is, open to everyone, maintained by the community, owned by my family. That's what Grandpa Joe would have wanted. Tom smiled. I figured you'd say that, but the offer stands if you ever change your mind. After Tom left, I walked down to the bridge and ran my hand along the oak railings. My grandfather had shaped 60 years ago. The wood was smooth from decades of weather and use, but still solid as the day he'd installed it. I thought about all the people who'd crossed this bridge over the years: loggers, heading to work in the early days, tourists exploring the mountains, my grandfather carrying supplies to build his dream cabin, me as a child running back and forth during summer visits, and now an entire community that had learned to stand together. Brenda Carlisle had tried to use fear and intimidation to control people, to force them into her narrow vision of what a community should be. But communities aren't built on fear. They're built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that we're all stronger when we support each other. That evening, as I was working in my grandfather's garden, I heard the sound of children laughing. A group of kids from the neighborhood were fishing in Devil's Creek, just downstream from the bridge. Their parents sat on the bank watching them, talking quietly among themselves. One of the kids, a little girl maybe 8 years old, caught a small bass and squealed with delight. Her father helped her remove the hook and release the fish back into the creek. "Good job, sweetheart," he said. Grandpa Joe would have been proud. I stopped what I was doing and looked up. The man waved at me, and I realized it was Jim Henderson. He'd been telling his daughter about my grandfather, keeping his memory alive for a new generation. That's when I knew Grandpa Joe would have been proud indeed, not just of the cabin I'd saved or the bridge I protected, but of the community that had grown up around them. A community built on the values he'd tried to teach me: respect for the land, respect for each other, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The roosters crowed in the distance, announcing the end of another day in paradise. I picked up my tools and headed inside, grateful for the peace my grandfather had built and the community that had helped me protect it. Some battles are worth fighting, not because of what you might gain, but because of what you refuse to lose. I'd refused to lose my family's legacy, and in the process, I'd help my neighbors find theirs too. The bridge still stands today, as solid as ever, carrying people safely across Devil's Creek, just as my grandfather intended. And every morning when I have my coffee on the porch, I can hear the sound of the community he built: children laughing, neighbors talking, roosters crowing, and the eternal flow of the creek that connects us all. That's the real victory, not the legal battle won or the bully defeated, but the understanding that home isn't just a place. It's the people who stand beside you when everything else falls apart. And that, I think, is what Grandpa Joe was trying to tell me all along.